Good evening, this is Mr. Wintermelon. So you have learned about heart as well as our transport network, which is our blood vessel. And in this video, you will find out the content of the blood vessel, which is actually the blood, as well as their function. The objective of this video is for you to state the role of blood in transport and defense. There are four main components of blood. So if the question asks you what are the things that are found in blood, you are supposed to say the four main components rather than just oxygen, carbon dioxide, yada yada yada, and so on. Name the four main components instead of those other substances. What are the components of blood? If you collect a blood sample and send it to be centrifuged, you will get a sample with three layers. The first layer is the plasma. It consists of 55% of the total blood and is mainly made up of water, some protein, hormones, ions, as well as nutrients. Then we have our cellular components that are made up of all cells. It is a thin layer that is between the translucent plasma as well as the red color layer, which is the red blood cell. So the thin layer consists of your white blood cell as well as platelets. And of course, the bottom layer is the red blood cell because they are the heaviest. So what are the four main components? They are plasma, white blood cells, platelets, as well as red blood cell. So the function of blood in transportation of substance is they transport oxygen, carbon dioxide, food, hormones, waste, as well as body heat. As for the function of protection, they produce antibodies. They are also involved in phagocytosis of foreign bodies. And lastly, clotting of blood to prevent loss of blood as well as prevent bacteria from entering our body. We shall now first take a look at the detail of blood as an agent for the transport of material. The first component which we will learn about is our red blood cell. And actually, you have already learned it in the first chapter where we talk about cells. So red blood cell, as all of you know, is involved in the transport of oxygen. And its feature, let us just recap, is biconcave. This will increase the surface area to volume ratio. It also lacks a nucleus, which allows it to carry more hemoglobin. It possesses hemoglobin, which oxygen has a high affinity for. And lastly, it is elastic to allow them to squeeze through the blood capillary. This is just for your information, the role of hemoglobin. Hemoglobin is a protein complex that contains 4 iron atoms, and it gives blood its red color. It's able to bind to oxygen molecules, and in its unbound stage, hemoglobin is deep purplish red. And when oxygen comes along and chill around with hemoglobin, you can see that the hemoglobin turns into bright red oxyhemoglobin. So this is just more for your info as to why the red blood cell is red in color. Not really necessary for your O-level syllabus. It's more for your curiosity pursuit. Now, this is important. Hemoglobin has high affinity for oxygen. That means they bind readily to oxygen. So in region where there is high concentration of oxygen, such as our lung, oxygen can easily bind onto the hemoglobin inside our red blood cell. This is a reversible process, meaning that the oxygen can bind to hemoglobin as well as unbind with hemoglobin. In region whereby there is low oxygen concentration, such as our exercising muscle, the oxygen will unbind and diffuse towards the region. This will allow our muscle to continue to perform aerobic respiration. The transport of carbon dioxide is more complicated. So carbon dioxide will diffuse from our tissue into our blood plasma, whereby it will encounter our red blood cell, it will diffuse into our red blood cell, and they will be converted into hydrogen carbonate ion. This hydrogen carbonate ion will then diffuse into the blood plasma. It have to be converted into hydrogen carbonate ion because they are more soluble in water as compared to carbon dioxide. So carbon dioxide in our blood is being transported in the form of hydrogen carbonate ion. Our blood plasma will carry this hydrogen carbonate ion to our lung. And because the concentration of the carbon dioxide in our lung is low, this hydrogen carbonate ion will get converted back into carbon dioxide. This also occurs in the red blood cell. So since the carbon dioxide concentration in the blood plasma is higher than that of the lung, it will diffuse out from the blood plasma and into the lung. And when we breathe out, the carbon dioxide will be forced out from our lung into the surrounding. So this is also part of the function of blood plasma as well as red blood cell, because red blood cells is involved in the conversion of carbon dioxide into hydrogen carbonate ion as well as the reverse process. Next, let us fully look at the function of our blood plasma. In our blood plasma, as I have mentioned, it consists of mainly water. So water, as we have learned, is a very good solvent. The water is used to transport plasma protein, which consists of clotting factor as well as antibodies, ions or salt, which help to maintain our osmotic balance, as well as serve as a pH buffer. What is a pH buffer? Our blood needs to be maintained at a certain pH level. So this salt in our blood will help to keep our blood pH stable. There are also waste that is carried by our blood plasma, such as our urea and, as I have mentioned, carbon dioxide. So our blood plasma is used to transport food, which consists of glucose, amino acid, as well as vitamin. There are also hormones in our blood plasma, such as insulin, glucagon, and adrenaline. All of these we will learn in a later chapter. There are also waste such as your urea, uric acid, as well as creatinine. It is good for you to learn all these three, which you might get asked for your O-level. And lastly, respiring tissue will produce heat. And this heat will be distributed evenly throughout our body by our blood, because the blood will absorb the heat and carry it all around our body. So now we have seen how our blood transport metabolic substance and the important role played by hemoglobin. Let us shift our attention to the protection function of our blood. So firstly, the blood produces antibody. Antibodies are soluble proteins. They are mainly produced by lymphocytes. Lymphocyte is a specialized white blood cell that produces antibodies. Do you need to know the spelling of lymphocytes? No, you just need to know white blood cell. So antibodies are capable of recognizing foreign objects. They bind onto them. And because these antibodies are on the surface of foreign object, another type of white blood cell will come over. The antibodies on the foreign object will help the white blood cell identify the foreign object, and the white blood cell will consume it and destroy the invading organism. And this process is known as phagocytosis. Phagocytosis is performed by phagocytes which ingest foreign particles. Do you need to know phagocytes? No, you just need to know that it is white blood cell that is doing it. So your O-level syllabus doesn't distinguish between the white blood cell producing antibody as well as the white blood cell that is performing phagocytosis. But what you do have to know is this term called phagocytosis. Phagocytosis is the ingestion of foreign particles. So if you bring your attention to the right, you can see the GIF right there, and you can see the bacteria that is being chased by a white blood cell. And the white blood cell will engulf the bacteria, and this process is known as phagocytosis. So as mentioned, there are mainly two types of white blood cell: the lymphocytes, which produce antibodies, as well as phagocytes that are involved in phagocytosis. So for your O-level syllabus, you just need to know white blood cell. White blood cell produce antibodies, and white blood cell are involved in phagocytosis. The antibodies will tag on to pathogen or foreign object. This will allow the other type of white blood cell or phagocytes to identify them and ingest them through phagocytosis. So these are the two functions: produce antibodies as well as phagocytosis. Lastly, let us learn about platelets. Platelets are not true cells, they are just fragments of cells. But they play a critical role in clotting of blood. The process of clotting of blood is important, so you do have to take note. When there's damaged tissue, platelet first form a platelet plaques. This is temporary and it will minimize the blood loss. Platelet also cause soluble fibrinogen to be converted into insoluble fibrin threads. So you can imagine that fibrin thread is like your thread which you make your clothes. And those fibrin threads, they will form a mesh which will entangle red blood cell, forming a clot. So it is something like a fishing net, whereby fishing net is used to catch fish. This fibrin thread is used to catch red blood cell or entangle them at the site of the wound. And this will cause the wound to be sealed. And the purpose is to prevent excessive blood loss as well as to reduce infection by bacteria, because once the hole or cut have been sealed, bacteria cannot enter. And this is also why, because of the entangled red blood cell, normally when we see the site of our injury, it forms a red color patch of hardened skin, but it is not really skin, it's actually red blood cell. There's one last thing that I want you to take note, and that is inside your syllabus, it is only mentioned platelets activate fibrinogen to fibrin threads. You do not need to know the intermediate process of prothrombin being converted into thrombin. This thing you don't have to know, you just have to know platelets, fibrinogen being converted into fibrin threads. This fibrin form a mesh that will entangle red blood cell, forming a clot. That's all. Easy peasy lemon squeezy. And that will be all for the function of blood. There are 4 components: red blood cell, which is used to transport oxygen as well as convert carbon dioxide into hydrogen carbonate ion. Your blood plasma, which transport nutrients, waste, hormones, antibodies, and distribute our body heat. Our white blood cell, which defends our body by producing antibody as well as ingestion of foreign particle in phagocytosis. And lastly, we have our platelets, which play the critical role of clotting our blood to prevent excessive blood loss as well as reduce the chance of infection.